Hello, welcome to the welcome to the Bússola Tech webinar on the Tech agenda. My name is Luís Kimaid. I'm the CEO of Bússola Tech. Today, we are here to discuss the digital transformation process in traditional legislative houses. We are deeply honored to welcome to our webinar discussion today Professor Beth Simone Noveck, Director of the Governance Lab at the New York University. Welcome, Professor Beth Noveck.
Hi, happy to be here.
We also have the honor to welcome Luís Fernando Bandeira de Mello, Secretary General of the Board in the Brazilian Senate. Welcome, Luís Bandeira.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
We are here today to deep dive on how traditional legislative houses can use technology to improve its legislative process. Legislative activities continuity is essential to respond to the current COVID-19 crisis in order to promote the debate on the possible solutions and to check the actions of the executive power. Democratic processes are not only applicable to times of normality, but even more essential when in moments of crisis. Today, May the 11th, Brazil has already 101 legislative houses using different forms of remote deliberation. Few of them, to be more precise, 3 of them have specific systems developed, such as the Brazilian Senate, the Brazilian House, and the City Council of São Paulo. All the other houses are using commercially available tools in order to remote deliberate. In a research Bússola Tech led with Brazilian legislative houses, we see that nearly 40% say their main challenge is to overcome cultural and political resistance to use technology to improve the legislative process. We also see relevant challenge in regard to access to technology, access to a good connectivity, and also a deeper understanding on how to use technology. The executive branch is in different countries is already a heavy user of technological tools to improve its effectiveness. The usage of technology in the public sector has different levels between the executive branch and the legislative branch. For example, now for the first time in centuries, the House of Parliament in the United Kingdom is remote deliberating, while the executive branch is using technology to make its effectiveness improve for a few years. Now, we invite Luís Bandeira to make his opening remarks on the experience of the Brazilian Senate. You have the floor, Luís.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you hear me well? You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very glad and very honored to be able to address some words to all of you. I'd like to thank Bússola Tech for this kind invitation. I'd like also to greet Mr. Luís Kimaid, our host today, and Professor Beth Noveck from NYU, New York University. I would like to start this 10 minutes presentation talking about the Brazilian Senate program called E-Cidadania, and later about our remote deliberation system, the SDR in the Portuguese acronym. Well, in Brazil, the Senate has a feature in its website called E-Cidadania, which can be translated as a citizen participation, that offers the opportunity for citizens to use digital media and influence the legislative process in 3 ways: submitting law ideas, participating in interactive events, and voting on public consultation. Well, let's talk about law ideas first of all. The first 2 is the possibility of any citizen to present an idea for a new law. The person fills in an online registration form and can send his or her idea to the Senate. Then the idea goes through a moderation filter to avoid offensive, criminal, repeated, and non-legislative ideas. After that, the idea is published on the Senate website and can receive support by other citizens during 4 months. If it reaches 20,000 supports in 4 months, the idea is formalized and sent to the Human Rights Senate Committee. It's the Human Rights and Citizen Participation Committee. If the committee approves, the idea turns into a formal proposition, and the senators discuss it and vote on following the regular rules of the legislative process, the standing rules. The program started in 2012, and in 7 years, 37,000 people have submitted 57,000 ideas. 122 received over 20,000 support, and 38 of them already received a report from the Human Rights Senate Committee, and 10 of them became formal propositions. Some of them have already been voted and approved by Senate. The ideas that now are propositions have a wide range of subjects: criminalization of anti-homosexual assaults, decriminalization of cannabis, tax reductions, environmental protection, and even income raise of public servants. Well, let's talk about the interactive events. The second two is the possibility of citizens to participate online in the Senate committee hearings. Brazil's Senate has weekly hearings to debate law proposition and to argue authorities that goes from agency presidents to ambassadors and Supreme Court justices. Those sections are open to the public, either to visit in person or to participate online via the e-Cidadania feature, as people can watch live on YouTube. After registering on the Senate website, a citizen can submit its questions or comments to the panel. The chairman of the committee receives all the questions and chooses the best ones to ask the speakers. Every year since it started, the program has grown. In 2013, there were 54 interactive events and less than 300 people participated. Last year, we had 464 hearings with the participation of over 14,000 questions or comments sent in the hearings by people watching the session online. Hearings that are recorded the hearings that recorded the biggest participation were transparency in the public contract with industry sectors, the Alexandre de Moraes nomination to the Supreme Court, and voluntary termination of pregnancy, abortion. Well, let's talk about the third tool. The public consultation is a tool available to the public about every single proposition discussed in the Senate. Again, the citizen is required to fill in a registration form, and then he or she can vote, can say the opinion online for or against any law project, constitutional amendment, and other propositions. The results are updated in real time, and the senators have access to a share of the public opinion. They are not obligated to follow the results, but there have been cases in which senators have dropped propositions after overwhelming negative results in the polls. Since it started in 2013, over 8 million citizens have voted in 7,000 propositions. The number have increased over the years, going from just 500 people to over 4 million in 2018. Three propositions received more than 1,600,000 votes. The e-Cidadania feature of the Senate website has around 130 million access per year. Well, that was a brief view over the e-Cidadania, our citizenship program, but I would like to talk about the SDR in our acronym Portuguese, our remote deliberation system. And I'd like to start with a motto that our team has spontaneously adopted during this pandemic situation. In times of crisis, Parliament cannot stop. Along with universal and periodical elections, the normal operation of Parliament is the most obvious and indispensable element of a nation's democratic nature. Today, our aim is to share the expertise, the know-how in the French sense of savoir-faire, developed by the Brazilian Senate as of March the 13th, and also learn from other experience. When we identified the imminent risk represented by the senators' on-site meetings in the Brazilian capital, we concluded these gatherings should not take place due to the coronavirus pandemic outbreak. Well, first of all, what do we understand as the Brazilian Senate Remote Deliberation System, SDR? It is a system made of 4 parts: a video conferencing tool provided by a third-party enterprise, a remote protocol tool developed by the IT team of Brazilian Senate to receive amendments, new propositions, new ideas from the senators. Third, a remote secure voting tool developed by a Brazilian enterprise hired by the Senate in 7 calendar days. We have a little 3-minute video to show a little bit about this. And a set of operational guidelines in the how-to-do basis to integrate these 3 other solutions. As the SDR video conferencing solution was implemented at the Brazilian Senate through the same software used by several enterprises. It was chosen due to features essential to the smooth running of the session, such as control of participants' microphones. This feature is associated with the possibility of virtual raising hands to speak, and by means of a digital button. Thus, it is possible to maintain the order of speeches, something crucial to hand the floor to all members in an organized manner. In addition, in devices such as the desktop computers and notebooks, the software is capable of simultaneously showing video from a greater number of participants than other similar solutions. At the Brazilian Senate, the software was acquired in a version that allows the simultaneous participation of up to 300 users. We have the Brazilian Senate have 81 senators. In addition, but the House have 513. In addition, participants who do not have access to the internet, and this is very important, or a device with the necessary resources for their participation in time of the session, will be able to access it by a conventional toll-free telephone, which is quite relevant in locations where internet access is not sufficiently stable. For this, the video conferencing software provides a toll-free number and a specific access code for the meeting. The participant's connection will work in the same way as the others, but without the video broadcast. At the Brazilian Senate, we have chosen to go 100% remote. I'm aware that other parliaments have preferred to adopt a semi-remote solution with some MPs, especially party leaders, physically present at the hall. Well, let me show you some pictures of the implementation of our solution. Do you see the pictures? The first one? Okay. Here you see our virtual plenary, or our bunker, as we call it, our space and central infrastructure for the video conference. Although the video conferencing software is accessible by any kind of device, such as a desktop computer, a notebook, or a mobile phone, the use of a centralized space with better infrastructure to chair the meeting is paramount. This place gathers the chair of the session, the speaker, secretaries, filming crew, among with other people essential to record keeping and the smooth running of the business. At the Brazilian Senate, we use a space with 6 workstations and with microphones and webcams, which accommodate, in addition to the chair, the rapporteur, the secretary, and the assistant. Let me, yes, some photos. The closeness of these participants allows the chair to conduct the session while their assistants control the microphones, the order of the speeches, and calculate the votes when necessary. And we have assured the minimum distance recommended by healthcare. At the same time, other teams such as communications team do the proper broadcasting. It is necessary, for instance, that the microphone control be done in person to ensure the promptness of granting of the floor. In addition to the workstations connected to the internet, the Senate space has a video wall with 14 screens of 55 inches controlled by 2 computers and a sound system. We understand, however, that the minimum requirement is the existence of three TV screens of 50 inches, for example. The one on the left showing the voting panel, the one in the middle focused on the MEP who is speaking. This is the voting panel. In the middle, TV focus the one who is speaking, and at right, for example, the one with the matrix showing the video of the other participants. This arrangement can be done, for example, with a single computer controlling the three screens or two computers, one showing the voting panel and the other showing the video conferencing images. Why I explain this, Luis, I would like to show that it's not a very expensive installation. With three TVs, two computers, and a $200 signature of a license of a video conferencing tool, it's possible to have result similar to this one we are showing now. We also had to deal with the situation of a new senator that had to take possession of his duty during a remote session. Let me show you. I have a picture of this. There you go. We have done this inside the plenary bunker, and the other senators saw the new senator take his oath remotely. I would like also to emphasize that the Senate remote deliberation system was designed to work in emergencies like a war, natural disasters, and pandemics, when the on-site meetings are not possible. The rules set for the operation of the system presuppose these conditions. Therefore, we recommend using remote deliberation only to vote on matters that are urgent and cannot wait for the normalization of the situation. I believe that the remote deliberation system should not be trivialized. Although it is modern, it's sophisticated, and even fancy, it has the natural limitations imposed by physical distance. I am convinced that personal and direct contact between the members of parliament is essential for good parliamentary debate. The periods in which members normally address the audience before the votes should be avoided in order to promote a more objective session in this remote system, this remote way of doing parliamentary. The operation is stressful. Unless we have several training teams, a sole team seems to have an operational limit of 12 hours of session per week. If it is necessary to operate for a longer period or daily sessions, I strongly recommend that teams be organized on a rotation system. Equally, I understand that SDR should only be used in plenary sessions, not in committee sessions. Obviously, other parliaments may have different approaches to this issue. Well, a private technological solution was added to our system. This one developed specifically for the Federal Senate. Our technology transfer handbook informs the names of the companies, one American and one Brazilian, and all the work done by the Senate to implement this whole solution. I'd like to show the address of our handbook. This is our technology transfer handbook in 4 languages, in Portuguese, English, Spanish, and French, that can be useful for some people interested. I am aware that other parliaments around the world have already had experience with remote sessions at this time. However, at least based on the information I had access to, we held in Brazil on March 20th, the first 100% remote session with nominal, electronic, and safe voting. It had the successful attendance of all senators. This is the reason that we made our technology transfer handbook available, and this is our desire is to share this with the others. Finally, I would ask for the permission of our host, Mr. Luís Kimaid, to show, if it's possible, a 3-minute video produced by the Senate, and already dubbed in English, that explains how the Brazilian Senate may vote by their cell phones. May I show it, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So it will be a 3-minute video, and then I'll stop talking. I want very much to hear from Professor Beth. So there we go.
This video is a tutorial on how to use version 1.1 of the Brazilian Senate remote deliberation system. When a voting session starts, each senator receives on their mobile phone a link sent by the Secretariat General of the Board. In the System Access page, enter your identification code, the same one used for voting in the plenary hall. Then enter the password previously sent by the Secretariat General of the Board. This password is the same one used for remote debate sessions. To prevent typing errors, you can click on this image to visualize the password while entering it. Then click on the I'm not a robot button, and after that, click on Access. When there is an open voting session, the summary and the number of the bill appear on the screen. These are the options for voting: yes, abstention, or no. When the senator chooses one of these, a screen will open to take a picture of the senator. The picture is an authentication tool. A pop-up may ask permission to access your camera. Always reply yes. The picture must be taken to register your vote. After adjusting your image, click on Take a Picture. Then click on Confirm Picture. If necessary, another picture can be taken by going over the procedure again. You will next receive an SMS or WhatsApp message with a code to enter into the system and confirm your vote. Please note, if no message arrives, click here to get a new code. If still no message arrives, the device is probably in an area without a good network connection. In this case, click on the red button that reads Secretariat General of the Board. Our team will contact you for assistance. When your vote has been confirmed, the following will pop up on your screen. Vote successfully registered. In addition to the vote, the system allows access to the panel tab, which contains the same information as the Senate plenary panel. Inside this tab, you can see Leadership Guidance and List, where you can check on the senators who have already voted, organized by state. Please note, the panel tab will be available before you vote if you need to consult the guidance of your party leader. You may change your vote anytime while the voting session is in course. In this case, you will need to go through the whole confirmation procedure again. When the voting session is closed, just click on the panel tab to check the result. Enjoy!
Well, that's all, folks. My final message: in times of crisis, Parliament cannot stop. Thank you very much, and if you can, stay home.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you for your opening remarks. Now I'd like to invite Professor Beth Noveck to make her opening remarks. And be welcome, Professor Beth Noveck.
Great, thank you so much. Sound okay?
Perfect.
Good, thank you, Luis. Thank you very much. And I confess that I am here solely for the purpose of hearing Mr. Bandeira de Mello speak. I really wanted to hear your presentation. So I am earning my supper, as they say, by offering some remarks, but I am, as many people are, I think, around the world, very curious about the experiment going on in Brazil. I have talked many times here locally and in other contexts about the work that you're doing there. And as you know, we are all very impressed by what's happening. Cristiano Ferri, who's on the call, and Marco Conapaci, who's been helpful in arranging my being here, have been helpfully sharing their knowledge of what your work is. And I was very glad to hear from you today directly. So thank you very, very much for having me and for sharing all those materials in multiple languages as you're pointing out here. I'll try to read the chat at the same time as I'm talking, but I wanted to offer a few remarks by way of introduction just about the way that international legislatures are testing the use of new technology, what we're observing from around the world in terms of using new technology to convene, to deliberate, make laws, and vote on those laws, but also a word about how constituents are being engaged in the process. Public health officials have warned us there, as here, we're all struggling with this issue, that in addition to the current crisis that requires us to observe social distancing, that this current crisis may in fact grow worse, and we may in fact have a second round of the virus that may come in the fall and become even more disruptive than the challenges we're actually seeing today. In other words, there will be an ongoing demand for social distancing and an ongoing demand to address these issues, even if the immediate crisis subsides in the next few weeks, and that we really need action to address how we're going to innovate and improve on legislative continuity and legislative operations, as well as governmental operations more generally. There is an opportunity, I think, for a lot of legislatures around the world to follow the example of Brazil and those other countries who are continuing to use technology and innovating during this period, and as we heard, have been innovating for many years. Thanks very much to the Hacker Lab that you've set up there, having invested in new technologies and their use and innovations and operations for many years now. And we can learn from them. However, and before I dive into some of those further experiments around the world, let me add that many legislatures are not yet following suit. You have countries like Mexico, where the legislature is essentially on a very extended Easter break. And you have countries like the United States, which I can speak to with a little bit more expertise, where both the House and the Senate were expected to return this past week on May 4th, but the physician of Congress warned against it. The average age of a senator in the United States is 63. The average age of a member of our lower house, the House of Representatives, is 58. So the House has not reconvened. The Senate has decided to come back, but the leadership has very much adopted a wait-and-see attitude, thus far not changing the rules to fully allow for remote participation. So we cannot have plenary hearings, we cannot make laws remotely, we cannot vote remotely. There's no changes of rules in place yet to allow us to do these things in the way that you're doing them in Brazil. There has been some consideration of what we might call proxy voting, the ability to let someone else who is on the floor vote on your behalf. And there has been a great deal of experimentation, in other words, the holding of mock hearings. I had the good fortune to participate in a hearing with 60 former members of Congress. I participated in a virtual, what shall we call it, conversation. It wasn't legally allowed to be called a hearing, with current members of Congress. And there are many of these things going on to allow people to get used to working online, to begin to introduce the idea. But there really has not been any systematic legal nor technological effort to move operations properly online. This is deeply concerning, not only because of the age of members of Congress, but because of many members of the Capitol Police, as well as the construction workforce who take care of the building and whatnot, have been positively tested for coronavirus, not to mention existing members of Congress or staff. And as a result of the lack of legal changes, the underinvestment in technology, you have now not weeks, but months that have elapsed without a proper functioning of our legislative body. Okay, but the United States, I would like to say, and like other places, is increasingly becoming, I hope, I haven't counted, but in the minority of the many places that are innovating. So places like New Zealand is just one of dozens of legislatures which are turning to online video conferencing, like Brazil, but using Zoom, using Microsoft Hangouts, using Cisco Web Meetings or Google Hangouts, who are meeting in plenary or in committee form. Argentina, as you know, is also convening via Zoom. And France's National Assembly similarly is using Zoom for committee meetings. In early April, approximately 30 parliamentarians for France convened online. They had an interview with the country's online digital minister to discuss contact tracing and privacy with regard to coronavirus-related apps. Last week, after 800 years of tradition in the United Kingdom, lawmakers convened the first ever virtual parliament. They had a hybrid approach where some MPs were present in the legislative chamber and others joined remotely using Zoom. And prior to that first remote session, a support team contacted every member of the parliament to make sure that they would actually understand how to use the platform, that they would have the equipment that they needed to be able to participate. There is a member of parliament named Chi Onwura from a town called Newcastle upon Tyne, who's been leading the charge. And she comments in an interview we recently did with her that showing up is and showing that Parliament is doing what our people need us to do is absolutely necessary. And this was absolutely a tremendous success. But this kind of convening, I'd like to add, even though for many places it still represents an innovation, an experiment, a one-off, is not a second best solution. There are plenty of places where, as we've seen in Ecuador, where 129 members out of a recent session that their Congress has 137. So they did a recent hearing on first responders, and they had this far better attendance than you see even in face-to-face hearings. So more people are showing up than they do for in-person hearings, because frankly, it's easier to do so from your living room or from your bedroom, as the case may be, than it is to come in person for many people who have to travel very far. That may help to explain the popularity of online meetings in Chile, where they are meeting remotely via Zoom to debate issues ranging from extending postnatal leave to forbidding the denial of basic services during the epidemic to citizens. Along with Zoom, they use an independent application that shows a clock in the background and allows the management of speaking time during a deliberation. Those who wish to speak press a button and are entered into a queue, and the president of the Senate then recognizes each speaker for 5 minutes, and their remaining time is shown on the clock, which flashes red when there are only 60 seconds remaining. And the president can then mute the speaker, of course, via Zoom once his or her time has expired. Members of Parliament in Chile have expressed a great deal of interest in having these deliberations online continue post-pandemic, simply because of the long distances that people have to travel from their home jurisdictions back to the capital. So there's a lot of popularity to these methods and to seeing them used on an ongoing basis. Closer to my own home, in the state that I serve, where I still do some work with government in the state of New Jersey, next to New York City, the 120-member legislature there has been convening remotely. They very simply use a dial-in. They use a conference call where they have motions and debate. They vote on legislation, but they do it all verbally. And to join the call, a member of parliament has to verify their identity using a verification code. Their identity is checked against a list of members. And for voting, each member simply states his or her vote. And the clerk, who is still located in the assembly building, uses the usual voting machine that they use to essentially tabulate and count the votes that they usually use for record keeping. And they count up the votes in the same way that they would do normally, but they use a conference call to do this. And on March 25th, they had their first remote session, and they were able to pass 5 bills, all related to pandemic response, that allowed people, again, to continue working and to being effective at the state level in a way that we're not seeing at the federal level. That included both the Assembly and the Senate, both the lower house and the upper house for that state legislature. And there are other states where we're seeing similar progress, like in Utah and elsewhere. But many legislatures are not just convening online. As we've heard just now, like in Brazil, they are also voting online. And again, the systems vary widely in terms of how they do them. This, New Jersey system, you vote simply by speaking your vote. In other places, you raise your hand via Zoom. That's what we're doing essentially in Chile, where they have voted, for example, recently on access to unemployment insurance during an early vote in April, where simply you turn on your screen, you authenticate by everybody being able to see your face, and you vote on legislation. In Spain, they have actually had in place mechanism for remote voting long before mechanisms for remote deliberation. So back in 2012, they instituted a system for remote voting, which was intended not to facilitate continuity of operations in a pandemic, but simply to help those legislators who are going out on paternity leave or maternity leave, or who have a disability and who need to actually be away from the chamber. They keep open the system for voting for 2 hours before and 2 hours after the deliberation to allow people to register their vote and to change it. Finally, let me just conclude with a final word on this idea of using technology not only to convene, to deliberate, and to vote, but actually to engage citizens in new ways, to engage in citizen participation, or what we at the GovLab like to call crowd law, what we affectionately refer to as the use of new technology to engage citizens in the lawmaking process itself. So in France this April, 65 members of parliament across all political parties instituted a new online engagement that they called the Day After, where they invited the public to offer suggestions for how to reopen the economy, how to respond to the pandemic, including such topics as refurbishing the healthcare system or planning for the future of work. They had 11 different topics for this engagement in which citizens are currently engaged in participating as we speak. In the UK, this is not a new thing. Committees of the UK Parliament have for many years now, on occasion, been doing what they call evidence checks. So they take the evidence that a government agency supplies as the basis for a policy, and they invite experts and stakeholders to review that evidence and question the evidentiary basis for a given policy as part of their oversight process, as part of holding the executive branch accountable. As many of you may know, in Taiwan, the V-Taiwan process, which is a 4-stage online and offline process, has been used to engage over 200,000 citizens in the formulation of 26 pieces of national legislation, ranging from the regulation of Uber and ride sharing to online alcohol sales and telemedicine. Over 80% of the public participation processes they start end in formal legislative action. So they have a real outcome. Finally, here in the United States, this year, an interest group, an NGO called the Federation of American Scientists, launched an effort called the Congressional Science Policy Initiative. They have a network of 600 scientists who are perhaps taking a page from what's happening in Brazil, helping to ask the questions, provide the questions that the congressional staff prepare for the members of Congress to ask. So when there is a hearing involving now vaccines or testing or questions, science questions relating to coronavirus, they help formally these scientists to write the questions so that they're intelligent and they're thoughtful and they're based on evidence. Finally, from February to mid-March this year, just a few weeks ago, seems like 3 years ago now, but just a few weeks ago, over the period of 6 weeks, in my own state, again, the state of New Jersey, I chair the Future of Work Task Force. And we ran an online public engagement exercise using a wiki survey tool called All Our Ideas. It was developed at Princeton, but extensively has been used in Brazil. We used it to engage workers themselves in defining the challenges related to and associated with technology and its impact on the future of work. And in that period of about 6 weeks, we had 4,500 responses to questions about the future of work. Again, this was a long list of existing answers, which people selected among, giving our task force and state officials then a prioritized list of problems, predefined, visualized, and organized, not an open-ended list of questions or comments that people didn't have time to review, but a sorted list of proposals in a very, very rapid time. The task force had essentially pre-populated that tool with all those answer choices, meaning that we had a rank ordered list at the end. That same tool has been used in over 14,000 different consultations around the world, as I said, including in Brazil. So in conclusion, let me just wrap up by saying that I think legislatures around the world in many places, perhaps not coincidentally, mostly in Latin America, I would say, are beginning to use IT successfully, both to survive in this pandemic, but I think also to thrive, to continue operations in the way that they've done before, but also to use technology that's long been available to us to now innovate and change the way that they work in order to innovate tomorrow and develop legislative processes that are better, stronger, and more democratic. Let me stop with that.
Thank you, Professor Beth. I will pose a few questions for both of our speakers now. I'll ask both of you to answer as brief as you can so we can have time to answer the questions of our attendees as well. Luis Bandeira, I will start with you. Members commonly associate the use of technology with their duty to communicate with their communities, with their voters. When the use of technology moves to improve the effectiveness of the legislative process with new transparency participation or even AI application tools, members usually associate it with the loss of their power to decide. How can we overcome this fear, this cultural barrier to implement technology such as the SDR on legislative houses?
Well, Luis, thank you for your question. I believe the remote deliberation system, as I've said in my first opportunity, is not to be trivialized. It's not to substitute. So it's not intended to get in the place of the normal parliament deliberation. I guess the senators, the first reaction was, wow, we can vote remotely. And they found this incredible. After 4 weeks working in the system, they are aware already that the physical direct contact between the senators and the Congress members is essential. Is essential. So our focus is to allow Parliament to continue their deliberation in the actual basis in social distancing period, but we are willing to come back to 100% presential. Sure, we will have a time in a semi-presential mode. So those senators who are more fragile, more the older, and eventually those who have some problem of health, they would continue remotely. And later we had some senators physically in the hall. But we are going to come back to the 100% presential. We believe this is essential. We believe this must be done as soon as we get safe.
I think I would add one thing to your response. We previously discussed that the Senate is taking a care to implement a system to include senators that might not have access to internet, so they can call a free toll number to join the session. Could you briefly explain how this works?
Yes. Well, the vote by telephone. You want to know how it's processed, this vote?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, how when a senator he doesn't have internet, it must call a toll-free number, and the senator that is in a location without internet connection will pronounce his or her vote orally, and the senator next to the speaker of the house will make the proper vote in front of the cameras with a cell phone. The camera will focus the cell phone, and he will vote in the place of the senator that has just voted by telephone, and we will have the photo of the user of the phone will be the photo of the senator secretariat besides the president. This is 100% related to our standing rules. Our standing rules say that when a senator votes, the secretary of the session will take note of his vote. So it's the same approach, but with new technology. The vote, and also it's important to say that the voting panel that I show a picture shows the orientation of each party leader and how each senator voted. And so this is, we have accountability in this procedure.
Perfect, Luis. Thank you. I think this is an outstanding feature of your project to include people, or in this case, members that are still joining new technological tools. So you don't exclude anyone from this process. I think this is one of the most outstanding features you have developed. Professor Beth, I do have a question for you. Besides the technical expertise that some houses have been developing for some years, which political and cultural characteristics are commonly found on legislative houses successfully implementing remote deliberation systems, participatory tools? What kind of political and cultural features can we find in these houses?
So I think it's a really good question that I, in many ways, would like to put back to the group. You know, in the United States, we're hearing the argument that I think is very genuine in the way people mean it, in that they are worried about tradition. They're worried about changing practices that have always been this way. So they make constitutional arguments, they make legal arguments, but what I hear more of, or at least underlying it, is the fear that if we move online, that Congress will become a museum, that we will essentially somehow undo democracy as we know it if we have a webinar like this. And I think there's really a lot of fear also that, and not entirely unfounded, that once you let people meet online, they will always want to meet online, and it will be very difficult to, when things go back to normal, to ensure that people still meet face to face and that we preserve some aspect of deliberation. And yet you have legislatures like the UK, which are much older than ours, or Iceland, where they are very comfortable moving online. So what's the difference and what's going on? I think, you know, the first question is, and I would sort of put back to people here, I have my own theories about this, but I think there's more expertise in this room to ask, why is most of this innovation happening in Latin America in particular? What is it about the political history of Latin America that perhaps creates the impetus to say we cannot stop doing our job of holding the executive accountable, and we must continue to function as a check on the executive branch, that people are not willing to let that go in ways that you know, you would think we would want to do here. But in many ways, I think it's not just the fact that we don't have the same kind of cultural and political history that you have, but I think there's a great desire, frankly, to centralize political control in the leadership of the House and the Senate. Right? So there's the view that when the rank and file members are away, the leadership can still, on the legislative side, can kind of do more on its own. So I think there's a mix of both lack of custom and fear and, you know, history, and also, frankly, politics that drive the view of like, oh, this is a great time for us to just run everything ourselves. But, you know, so coming back to your question, which I think requires a little, we're going to need a little bit more time to look back on what's happened this year, to really say, why is it that a lot is happening in the Ukraine? Why is a lot happening in Brazil? Why is a lot happening in Chile? I would surmise it has something to do with having an authoritarian political past, with having experienced dictatorship and not willing to say, even for a moment, that we are going to relax and stop doing our job as the legislature. But more practically speaking, the issue is these are places that have invested in technology, that have created a hacker lab, that have, you know, somebody like Chris Ferry helping them. Without creating a role like that, and without that kind of thought leadership, people are just finding themselves unprepared to do this work. So it's a combination, I think, of political history and technological capacity that makes a difference. And sorry, I forgot to follow the rule of being brief, but that's because I don't really know the answer yet, and I think we have to see what happens.
Professor, I do have another question for you.
And I'll be brief.
you mentioned the concept of crowd law. How can we use the concept of crowd to create this new tool? I mean, we are just starting to develop what the floor will look like, but the real challenge is to develop the selected committee's work. So it's the debates, it's the drafting of the bills. So how can we use this process of crowd to invite people to participate and build the process, the legislative process, and virtual with the houses?
Well, I think what you're giving me an idea that I think is there's two parts to this. One is we've seen, at least in the United States, that to help the government respond to the challenge of coronavirus, the executive side, the public health agencies and whatnot, there has been a massive effort stood up to provide volunteer capacity. We have something called the United States Digital Response, which was created a few weeks ago. They have 5,000 technology volunteers who are helping to build what's needed to get through this pandemic and working together, volunteers with government officials. We've seen the ability of crowdsourcing essentially in a very organized way to help solve a lot of problems. Right now, I'm working on the issue of how we're going to provide food assistance to more people in a system in which, you know, we can't handle this, the technical system cannot handle the number of requests we're getting. Same thing for unemployment, where we're using a lot of volunteers to help with these systems. This is a great opportunity for engagement. Again, you can't throw volunteers at these problems because you have to understand, in the way that your group does, what are the rules, what are the processes, what are we trying to accomplish. But there's a great opportunity now to engage with smart people and good technologies to solve some of these problems. But I think there's also an opportunity now to say, we need to engage with and hear from more people. Nobody has answers to these questions. Nobody has confronted this before, and we need really good ideas. So I'm hoping that inspires some people to want to get involved. And crowd law, again, is not constituent engagement. It's not calling, Mr. and Mrs. whatever to thank them for their postcard or to ask them to donate money, as we do in this country, it's not just that making nice, it's actually substantively engaging people in the lawmaking process, in the way that we've seen with projects, again, many of which were pioneered in Brazil, to really engage people in the substantive process. So 2 parts to that: civic tech engagement, volunteer tech engagement, but then also really engaging people in the lawmaking process.
Perfect, Professor. Thank you. Luis Bandeira, we have a question from Thales Quintão. He would like to know more about the privacy and protective data on these remote deliberations. He asks, what measures the Senate has been taking on this regard?
Okay, so in our technology transfer handbook, we explain in details how we configured our session. But I'll try to explain here. We use Zoom as software for a video conference, and we had heard about a lot of Zoom issues recently. But all these issues are related to connections without a password or without a domain level control. So to get inside our session, you need to have an email from a subsystem of the Senate, @sdr.senado.leg.br. We have created this domain specifically for the sessions. So we have 81 domains and 10 others to the people who get inside the session to help. And in order to get inside, you have to have an email with this domain. So this is already a good control. And I have several firewalls in the Senate. We are inside the ProDesign, the IT space of the Senate. We are there inside with support for batteries, for electrical generator. We are really very secure in terms of our functioning. If for the voting, the voting app, we have the password to get in the system. We have the photo done by the user. We have the code sent by SMS to a phone previously registered in the secretariat. So we have a lot of different tools to assure that is the real senator that is voting. And I would like to also to answer another question. I believe Professor Beth and also an attendant had demanded about the participation. We are having 100% of participation in our sessions. We are used in physical basis to have each vote 65, 70, 75 maximum senators voting in sessions, in presidential sessions. And now we have 100% of senators voting, 81, and this is really impressive. I believe this means that we have reached a system that is easy to use, because you have persons, we have senators that are very aged, 82, 85, 84, and sometimes it's not easy to get a digital. A lot of people remain analogical in this age, but I believe we have done a process that is interesting, and easy to use and safe, with electronic vote that is much faster than a vote declared orally. So I believe that this whole bunch of things have delivered a good parliamentary experience.
Luis, actually there is another question from Professor Beth Noveck here on the chat. I would ask this as a final question for us to finalize our webinar today. Professor Beth, she's asking, how do you explain why people have been so innovative in Brazil, where other countries are so far behind?
This demands an explication of what have we done since the 2010 in Brazil. We have developed a series of digital technological instruments to help the senators, the press, the journalists, newspapers, to help the citizen to understand what we were doing in the Senate. I talked about e-cidadania, citizenship. We have 2012 have begun this program. We had also electronic votes since the 80s. We have already all our publications are in digital version. We don't have more any paper in the propositions, in the amendment. So all this makes us a little more digital already. So when we had the first need of a remote session, I believe we were closer to the answer. So when we started to think about this was a Friday 13th of March, and we started. Well, I guess we have to work in a remote session, and it was Friday the 13th, and when we had our first remote session in March 20th, 7 calendar days later. So we had already a lot of instruments to help us. The remote protocol, for example, in order to the senators to make the amendments, to make the propositions, this was virtually in place already. We had this done already. So it was easier to integrate the different needs. And March 20th, we had this first remote session. And then the Monday, March 22nd, yes, 22nd Monday, we had our first vote with the app. Well, our first session, the vote was done orally. And the next Monday, March 22nd, we used already our app that I showed the video for you. So I believe it was a whole lot of conditions that helped us to start a little earlier than other countries. They are more traditional, like Canada, like UK, for example. They vote orally. They remain. They stand up to vote, and they're called by name. And this is a more traditional way of doing parliament. And sure, when they are more tradition, they have to walk a greater way or greater distance to get to a remote session. I believe, I hope I have answered the question.
Thank you, Luis. Actually, you answered the question of Poliana Batista as well. She asked how long did it take to develop the tool. You just answered that with the dates. Professor Beth Noveck, if you could give us a closing remark on our webinar subject today.
Oh, the final word here. First and foremost, just to thank you for doing this. And as I said, the more learning that we can have, and we really look forward to your sharing the video for this so we can help to disseminate it further in the United States. It's really, again, extraordinarily helpful, especially for us in this country to have the model of a legislature that is as big as that of Brazil's. And I think that's important, because this is an area in which, you can't just cite to Iceland or Estonia or the usual suspects for better technology. We really need institutions that look similar to our own in order to help people get over this hurdle and recognize that they can innovate. And I would just say that I think it's really, really important, the more that we can, as a community, join forces to push for not simply continuity of operations, but innovation and the embrace of citizen engagement. Experiences that you've had with projects like Mudamos that have been so wildly successful, with projects like Legis that have been so successful. Again, many things going on around the world, but the more that we can build this community of crowd law practice to embrace the idea that we need not only to convene the same old people simply on Zoom now instead of in the room, but to use hearings and committee meetings to bring in witnesses from all around the world, to get scientists and social scientists involved in participating in helping to ask questions and answer questions and supply better evidence, and to get everybody engaged in really supplying their experience, I think is really an extraordinary opportunity. And I hope we can exploit this crisis to do more of that, especially through further collaboration. So thank you for having me, and I'll pause with that.
Thank you, Professor Beth. Luis Bandeira, I will ask you to provide us your closing remarks as well, but with one particular feature. As Beth told, we are sharing this content openly with other people, with people from other countries. So if you could help inspire other public servants from legislative houses to implement such a solution as well.
Okay, well, as I said in my initial remarks, in times of crisis, the parliament cannot stop. And even if we do legislation that is not the ideal, because we have done it in a hurry, it's better to have some legislation in this crisis, this pandemic crisis, that no legislation at all. So the functioning of Parliament was essential to give the, say, 600 reals. How in dollars would be something like 120, 130 dollars that has been paid for the people that cannot work in the street. The normal functioning of Parliament was essential to liberate the government for some obligations due to budget that we had to liberate in order to government function well. a lot of legislation is being done right now. We just had a meeting with the party leaders, and we decided to vote 20 different propositions in the next 2 weeks in order to protect people to their debts, to protect people from losing their homes. Well, if we are asking people to stay home, how can we send someone to stay home if he cannot pay the rent of the home, of the house, and he'll get dumped from the house? So we are preparing legislation to protect people. So it's essential. The functioning of Parliament in a time of crisis is essential. And as I have explained, it's not expensive. You don't have to have a big screen to do what we're doing. With 3 TVs and 2 computers, you can do a parliamentary session. And I believe it is very important that the countries do this as soon as possible to answer to the big difficulties of this pandemic crisis.
Thank you, Luis. I'd like to
I
thank.
would like, Luis, I'm sorry, just to answer. Someone has asked for committees in the chat. The system can also work in committees. We have just one committee that is working. Is a committee of the pandemic. Is a committee created to vigilate, to surveil the government, and the other committees are not working. This is for our standing rules, because if the proposition is urgent, it goes directly to plenary and does not pass through the committee. It is not urgent, so it's gonna wait to the normalization of Parliament, and the committee will begin to work again. It's not a technical limitation. It's a limitation from the point of view of our standing rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis Bandeira. I'd like to thank Professor Beth Simone Noveck from the GovLab for your participation with us today. Also to thank Luis Fernando Bandeira de Mello, Secretary General of the Board in the Brazilian Senate. This content is developed by Bússola Tech in partnership with ITS Rio, with Synthelize, with Finalize, and with Swiss Next Brazil. We will share with our subscribers the exact date and how we are going to release this content. And of course, we are subtitling it and sharing this with other public servants in Brazil that do not speak English. Thank you all for coming today. It was a pleasure to debate with you.
Luis, thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Bye.